is you'd like me to present first and then we'll take questions, or would you like interruptions? I'm happy with any approach that suits you.
We're happy with anything that you prefer. Like if you want people to ask questions in between or get in touch with them in between, you can just do it. And if you want to do the whole presentation first and then take questions, we're fine with anything.
Not a problem. I might just get going with the presentation, and then feel free for anyone who's joining us today. First of all, welcome, to interrupt me at any point. I'm not too precious about that. So I'm happy to be interrupted if you've got a pressing question. Otherwise, I'll try to get through it perhaps in a 25 to 30 minute time frame, because this can go on for quite a while. That way we can leave some room for questions and for any other, I guess we're going to hear from the students as well, which I'm very interested in. So I want to get this portion done to hear about some of the great projects. Is the view okay on everyone's end? So when I'm going between slides here, that's fine?
Yeah, it seems to work very well.
That's fine.
Excellent. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for this warm welcome and for inviting me to join you today. I feel very privileged to be here. I've been provided with a list of student titles for their projects, which I think is very interesting. It's great to see a lot of work being done in the location-based services domain, and I've been working in this area for almost 15 years now. So, and a lot of it started in Germany, actually. A lot of my inspiration came from a lot of the German work around location-based services and mobile value chains and so on. So I feel it's almost come full circle with this presentation. So thank you for the invitation. I look forward to joining you for the next couple of hours, and hopefully we can learn from each other and I can get to hear a lot more from you as well. For those of you who have just joined or have been joining, my name is Roba Abbas. I'm from the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of Wollongong in Australia. And I'll describe a bit about my background just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, because I do recognise that perhaps your academic backgrounds are quite different from mine. So it's helpful to see my journey, to see how I reached this point of researching in this particular domain. I'll also speak a bit more broadly around other areas that I'm interested in, other opportunities for students if they'd like to get involved in some initiatives in this particular space as well. And for any of you who'd like to reach me, please feel free to contact me anytime using the email address roba, R-O-B-A, @uow.edu.au. So today I'll be speaking to you, I'll be presenting some of my work as you will be with yours around location-based services. Specifically, I'll be focusing around a project that was funded by the Australian Research Council around the topic area of location-based services regulation. I'll explain a bit about that, what it means, what it meant in the context of the project, and also some lessons that we can take away from that particular project moving forward. In particular, I'll be focusing on an overview of the methodology that we use. I'll start off talking about the theoretical underpinnings, and then we'll move to a discussion of methodological design, and specifically a consultative process within the socio-technical design space. And I think, based on my very limited knowledge of your projects, I think there's opportunities to build on this notion of the socio-technical as soon as we discuss anything to do with an emerging technology, and that technology being embedded within a context of some kind, within a regional context, for example, a broader societal context, or even at the individual level. I guess all of these lessons really apply. Before doing that, I think I'd spend a bit of time by describing my path to this particular point in time, so you can get a better sense, as I mentioned earlier, how I came to study location-based services regulation. So I was awarded a Bachelor of Information and Communication Technology honours in the Faculty of Informatics in 2006. At that point in time, a lot of my research was around systems analysis and design, networking, databases, and some programming. And I started to get an interest in how we actually develop systems to serve people. I progressed into industry post this for just over 5 years in a web design and development company. And we started to think about a user-centric or a human-centric view of the world. And that really propelled me into a PhD in location-based services based on an opportunity that I saw of a project running or a project that was funded by the Australian Research Council. And that's the project that I'll be talking to you about today, one that is centered on whether there's a need to regulate emerging technologies, such as location-based services. And an underlying factor in that regulation is this idea of how we design technology for a specific purpose, which I think might be of interest to some of you in the context of your projects. Post that, I completed my PhD, was in a number of research, governance and teaching roles in 3 different schools, and they were, for instance, informatics. I also had engineering, and now I'm currently in operations and digital business, so in a business domain. And I guess the beauty of areas or domains like location-based services and other kind of technology design domains is that they cross multiple boundaries. And I think I'll put a placeholder there with this multidisciplinary perspective, because we will get to that in terms of the methodology. I'm also involved in a number of other roles within the IEEE, of which some of your colleagues here and your instructors have been part of. So I'm the co-editor also of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society. So looking at how technology, society and law really work together from a business perspective, from an individual perspective, and also at the societal level. I'm also involved with the IEEE Standards Association, working on a standard for age-appropriate digital services for children, which I think is quite important to how we present services and terms and conditions to children. I was also the technical program chair for the International Symposium on Technology and Society, which had a lot of work that I think might be of interest to students. So please reach out to me if you are interested in some of the outcomes. And also I'm the IEEE Australia Council Student Activities Coordinator. So we work on projects that involve students, that involve student branches, and how best they can harness technology in the interest of serving humanity, which is really the motto of the IEEE. And in addition to some of my teaching roles as being a lecturer in the Faculty of Business and Law, I also research in the domain of socio-technical systems design using participatory approaches. So all of the research that I'm involved in, you can see some around the robotics area up on your screen, others to do with children as application design partners and involving them in the design of technology, and other such research, which I will share these slides for anyone who's interested in looking further. But I guess the underpinning notion here and what's relevant to the presentation today is what the emphasis is on, and that is on a human-centered perspective around technology design. Whether they are location-based services or any other kind of technology, how do we actually develop participatory approaches that are based on methodologically and theoretically sound, existing academic works and also industry-based aspects that allows to deliver technology that serves the public interest, and that's quite a fundamental premise for the presentation. Just give that a chance to load. Now, in terms of the actual sort of a bit of background, hopefully gives you a bit more of a sense about what I do and how I reach that particular point. In terms of what we'll be discussing in today's seminar, and I'm happy to be interrupted, as I said, I can see some chat messages coming through. If there's something that I guess you want to raise with me, feel free to do so by just unmuting so I can sort of monitor it in that particular way. But just by way of introduction, and I guess some of you might be familiar with this, I will be using location-based services and a co-design / consultative approach, and giving you some, some insights into my project that has been under development or in development, and I've been working on it for over 10 years now. And the case study is really on location-based services within the Australian context, but the outcomes of this project apply beyond. Before discussing my problem statement or what we set out to achieve in that particular project, maybe we'll just define briefly location-based services. I suppose at this particular point you are aware of what they mean, but the first task that we set about achieving was a consolidated definition of location-based services. At the time of this particular study, there wasn't a unified definition, but rather a collection of definitions that we tried to reconcile in a manner to give us an adequate understanding of how we define location-based services. In the context of this presentation, I'm using the term location-based services to be any application or applications that combine the location or position of a mobile device associated to a given entity with some form of contextual information in order to allow us to deliver a service, usually to the end user. That end user can be defined in quite a complex manner, but for the purpose of this talk, I think we'll just use end user as a generic term for definitional purposes. So if you think of GPS navigation devices, fleet management solutions in the organizational context, and even location-based social networking solutions at the individual level, we can really distinguish what types of applications might be encompassed within the definition of location-based services. Something I'll point to at this particular point is you can probably note that some of these applications sit at quite the individual level, so location-based social networking applications, for example. Others, such as fleet management solutions, sit at the organizational level. And then, as we've seen in the COVID-19 context, we've started to have, in some cases, location-enabled contact tracing solutions that are society-wide or large-scale implementations of location-based services. At the moment, I'm hoping to examine the use of location-based services in a grand scale in the dementia space, for example. The same technology used at different levels or units of analysis. So I think an important feature when we think about location-based services in the context of the project I'll be presenting is that they exist within a class of emerging technology that have the potential to radically alter the way we interact with each other and also with the technology itself. And in doing so, really redefine social interactions and question some of the socio-ethical ramifications or implications of their introduction. So when we diffuse these technologies in society, how do they react with existing social structures? How do we use them, for instance, in the case of some of the projects you're involved in the regional tourism /art/ whatever context that might be, because there are some implications of these technologies being deployed in specific contexts. These technologies as an emerging technology, I think they're well established in some contexts or in some respects, but quite emergent in others. They exist with other emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics-based applications, blockchain technologies, and machine learning, for example. What's really important about location-based services, and I guess the underlying premise for the project that I'm describing, is that the location aspect is quite crucial and key. So it serves to bridge, in a way, the anonymous online transactions of the World Wide Web with the physical environment through the idea of space or that spatial element. So the idea of using geospatial coordinates or location in order to mesh that with contextual details in the provision of a service. I think it's really important at this point to think about, when that loads, there we go, to identify the problem that we were facing at the time of the study, just to set the foundations for what it is we were trying to fulfill. I think this is an issue that we were facing at the time of the study, so roughly in 2009, but we are still facing now because there's a lot of emphasis now on the location-based services and location element more specifically. So this problem that we were facing and we are currently facing is a multifaceted one, and it helps to set out what those facets are or what those areas are in terms of problem statements. So in the first instance, if we think about them as being a three-tiered issue, in the first instance, we have these traditional technology or systems design and development processes that don't really account for social consequences or ethical alignment. So what I mean is traditionally, for instance, in my training, the training of my colleagues, whether it's in the IT or information systems space or the engineering space in which there are some overlaps, we're trained to develop technology in quite a siloed fashion. What that means is that the development process either happens in a lab, in a contained environment, and does not account for the social consequences or the ethical consequences, nor do we consider the regulatory environment around which these technologies are being developed. So that was the first problem. In the context of location-based services, the location information and the guiding of that location information wasn't particularly considered at the time of the project. In the second instance, I think stakeholders that either use, so the end users themselves, or are affected by the implementation of location-based services, aren't unnecessarily factored into the design of these technologies. So usually they're neglected. And when we think about usability studies, it tends to happen really late in the design and development processes relating to these technologies. And testing can be quite contained. So sometimes when we test with a subset of end user rather than with a broader stakeholder group that might be involved or might benefit from that kind of testing. And in the third instance, I think there's a range of federal and state legislation that needs to be accounted for. In the Australian context, we had the Federal Privacy Act, for example. We had the Surveillance Devices Act, but we didn't know how they would apply to the case of location-based services. So what you see on your screen is our research problem, things around socioethics and regulatory implications, the focus of engineering development processes be on technological potential, not the user, or on capitalizing on technological progression and not the user. And then there's a lack of addressing the issue of whether we need to regulate those services, particularly in this case in Australia. But as I said, some of the outcomes do apply more broadly than that. So there's a way in which we approached the research, and that was to ground it in a particular theory or set of theories. And I won't delve too much here because I really want to get to the outcomes of the project, but I'd be happy to answer questions in this regard. Is that we started off by thinking of how we want to approach the question by surveying a range of theories in the information systems domain, in the technology domain, in marketing, and in any other kind of field, I guess, where there's proven research or evidence of research pertaining to technology use and design. And what we found was that the theories that would serve us best was to consider things as an intricate, complex ecosystem, one that's receptive to environmental factors, and that's where the systems and open systems theoretical basis comes into play. Stemming from that is this idea, based on our research problem, that the social elements tend to be neglected, and the emphasis tends to be largely, particularly in design and development processes, on the technology itself. So it's very technologically deterministic as a view, rather than emphasizing the social, or in the case of the theory that we propose here as the basis for our consultation and our operationalization of the theory, socio-technical theory, which takes a holistic view of a system. So it says we have these social elements, we have these technical elements. How do we factor both of them in to the design of these technologies in addressing our research questions or problem statements? From that, we need to acknowledge a number of fields which are really important. So as soon as you delve into the socio-technical domain, we automatically start to talk about the field of human-computer interaction. And not at a simplistic level. So human-computer interaction as a field has been around for quite some time and tended to focus on how we interact, for instance, with peripheral devices, with a keyboard, with graphical user interfaces, and so on. But now in the case of location-based services and other emerging technologies, we're thinking about interactions at a much grander scale. So these large-scale, potentially socio-technical systems that exist in the world around us and how we interact with these complex systems. And from that stems this idea, a subset of the human-computer interaction field, if you will, around participation and co-design. And that's where the emphasis lies in terms of the research I'm presenting today. At the heart of this, or underpinning the entire research, I guess, is socio-technical theory. So as I mentioned, when we think about technology traditionally, we're focusing on the technical elements. This particular theory, which has been around from the 1950s, so it's not that it's a new theory, but that theory was devised at the Tavistock Institute in London in order to move away from technological determinism. So we create a technology, then society conforms, and socio-technical theory says, no, we don't really support this view. We're moving to that view where we look at the social, we look at the technical, and then we progress in our design efforts. In the context of our study, we also included an additional element. So we said it's great that we have the social and the technical, but how do we think about the environmental? Now, in terms of this theory, it can be used to design a range of technologies in a range of different ways, and I think that's an important point to really emphasize here. So we can use it to design work processes, if you will. We can use it to design interfaces that require individual interaction as per the traditional form of human-computer interaction. We can use it to design an entire information system, emerging technologies like location-based services, or even think about it in terms of the design of the society around us, any society that involves a technical and a social component. Now, the idea here is that when we are trying to design systems or to solve, in this case, a socio-technical problem, so the problem is, do we regulate these technologies? How do we design in a way that incorporates the social elements? And how do we move away from traditional approaches? That's quite a complex problem. We need to work in the first instance towards modeling the interactions in order to produce a result that has shared goals or benefits. So a system, if we think about systems theory, is working towards a unified goal. So a system has one goal or direction, and all the components within a system work towards that goal. In terms of socio-technical theory, if we're working towards achieving a goal that serves the social element and the technical element, this is referred to as joint optimization. So you're trying to optimize the social and the technical outcomes, in our case, considering the environmental aspects as well. So in terms of what we tried to do in the first instance in order to determine the best path forward, we developed a socio-technical or a consultative socio-technical design methodology. As part of developing this methodology, the first point of call was to actually look at who the stakeholders are. So if we say we're going to engage in a participatory approach, who do we actually participate with? Who do we actually consult with? So the crux of this, or the central area within this methodology, is an appreciation of the stakeholders involved in the provision of these location-based services. So we conceptualize what you have here on the screen, which is the value chain as per the socio-technical representation. So you have your operational stakeholders, you have your non-operational stakeholders, so they're your technical and non-technical, and then the context was Australia, and everything was driven towards this value generation process, moving towards the end user. So we have operational stakeholders such as the content providers, application and portal providers, and then you have other stakeholders that traditionally are not factored into design efforts, the user, standardization bodies and committees and so on. And it's really important to have this holistic view, at least in the context of this study and in the context of our design endeavor. So that gives you a bit of a view of our methodology, who we're engaging with, and some of this might be relevant, I guess, to student projects, depending on the nature of that. So I think in the interest of time, I won't talk too much more about the value chain, but I will go to the next slide, which looks at how we actually factored in this process of engagement. So our methodology was multi-phase and was centered on engaging the stakeholder groups on the previous slide in the designing of a regulatory solution. So this gives us a blueprint for how best to design technologies, but also gives us a sense in terms of the engagement strategy. In our first phase, we centered our discussions on the user through an observational study of users of location-based services, where they were equipped with tracing and tracking devices and were required to maintain quantitative or location-based logs in addition to reflection-based journal entries. And that gave us a sense around thematic and spatial analysis techniques that we could apply to understand how users interact with commercial location-based services. That allowed us to actually look into the industry and government situation in phases 2 and 3. So we interviewed and consulted with technical and non-technical industry stakeholders based on our outcomes from the initial phase. And then we went to the third phase of the project, which was interviews of and requests for statements from government agencies. That way it's not giving us a skewed view of this potential research problem, but giving us more of a holistic view that if we are to design in a particular context, who are the people or the groups or types of stakeholders that we are interested in. Again, phase 1 of the project formed the basis for the other remaining phases, and the data collected was both qualitative and quantitative in nature, and resulting in thematic and also spatial analysis, spatial being housed within a geographic information system, leading then to the development of scenarios. I'm going to show briefly example analysis and findings. Okay, so this is an example of data that was collected in the initial phase of the project. So we had a data logging exercise and reflection exercise that I mentioned earlier. And here are some samples of the outcomes of that logging exercise. So we had GPS data loggers that were distributed to users for technical testing and for assessing the socio-ethical implications based on this usability study, this observation-based usability study, particularly looking at the consumer or end user domain. There was also that accompanying diary or reflection component, resulting in a mix of quantitative geospatial data and reflections that you can see on your screen. So you've got the data in quantitative geospatial form, you've got your reflection in narrative form, and that allowed us to actually develop a range of scenarios that we used as the basis for our research across a risk spectrum. So usability scenarios that were quite low risk, so for example, emergency management situations, right through to covert tracking, which ended up being on the sort of high to catastrophic risk scale. In the interest of time, I won't explain too much about that, but I guess it might be helpful at this point just to leave some time for questions to talk about some of our findings from this project. So we engaged in that multi-phase project. We tried to develop blueprints for the best way in which we can design socio-ethical or location-based services that were conscious of socio-ethical implications. And then we developed what we set out to achieve, which was a sense around whether we need to regulate the industry to assist in protecting stakeholder groups, particularly or primarily end users. And a major finding is what you can see on your screen here, which I'll try to describe really briefly. So our findings in this particular study was that location-based services do benefit in a range of different scenarios, and we mapped out what those scenarios are. Emergency management, in your case, you're looking at, in regional areas, tourism, arts, culture, food, things of that nature, and that's quite important. So there is a utility and there is a benefit to location-based services, but in the Australian context and based on our analysis, we found that there was in fact a need to design, develop and use location-based services in a regulated environment. And the outcome on the screen is the regulatory framework that we proposed that needs to be carefully designed at various levels, ranging from the consumer level right through to the government level. So you can see at the top of your screen, hopefully that's showing well on your end, the individual level stipulated that we needed adequate levels of protection balanced with flexibility of choice and access to features and technological potential. So we need to regulate specific instances of use around emergencies, for example, but still support industry development. So we don't want to stifle the development in this domain, but we need to ensure that adequate protections were in place. On the next level that you see on the second tier of the pyramid, we have the company or industry level. So in this particular area, our research showed and our consultation with industry partners showed that there was a call for a multi-layered approach to regulation, allowing for co-regulation created and administered by industry members. So things such as, for instance, codes of practice, standards and other principles were considered to be quite important. And there was also a flagging. So we did an assessment around existing laws within Australia, which I didn't have much of a chance to cover here, that there was a call for the revising and the strengthening of existing laws. And that's at the sort of company/industry level. Then we have the government level, which sits at the bottom of the pyramid, in which there was a call to address patchy and inconsistent laws around privacy and surveillance devices, for example, and also to promote somewhat of a uniform regulation across Australia with clearer implementation guidelines, further work on emergency management capabilities and state to government related legislation or regulation. And I can see that we're reaching sort of the 30-minute mark. So what I'll be doing is just quickly showing impact and then wrapping up to allow some questions. Okay, so I've just missed a slide there. So this slide essentially sets out some of the impact of this work from an academic, industry and general public perspective, which I'm happy to talk to in a moment. But I think I'll just go to the last slide to talk about, so what does this mean? And that'll take us to sort of the 30-minute mark here. In terms of this research, I think there is a broader application of this research beyond just the Australian context and location-based services. So while certainly we can look to future directions in terms of work in the location-based services domain, such as your projects, for example, there's work beyond this and broader implications in terms of what we do with the underlying theory. So there's the potential to actually operationalize socio-technical theory in other contexts, and that's quite powerful. So we can take, for instance, the AI context. We could take, I've been involved since this project in projects where we've designed applications with children, for children, around improving gross motor skills and physical activity development, for example. And that requires some extensions to the theoretical basis, and hopefully we'll get a chance shortly to apply some of these learnings to some of your group project, or excuse me, your student projects. Additionally, what has emerged from this particular study, apart from the regulation element, is that there's the requirement for methodological innovation, particularly in the co-design space, so better ways in which we can actually invest in methodologies for participation around these technologies. And I think the more we talk to people and the more we consult, the better our technologies are, regardless of context, whether it's a regional context, a broader societal context, or even at the individual level. I can speak quite a lot about that, but I think that'll do. And I welcome any questions you might have here. Okay, I'll just hide the presentation, I think, for now.
Well, thank you, Roba, very much for your inspiring talk at first.
Thank you.
And yeah, or let's say we're happy to have some of our fellow students ask some questions about maybe also already in regard to your own projects. Maybe some questions already came up, so just feel free to ask.
Might be too early in the morning for location-based services questions and too late on this end.
Me personally, I don't have a question because it was a lot of great input. So thank you for that. Yeah, and I probably have to think about it a bit longer to have a question right now.
Not a problem. Quite a lot of information, wasn't there? I tried to put 10 years of work into a 30-minute presentation, which was quite hard, but
Then maybe I can just proceed with some questions from the background during your presentation, and also thank you very much from my side. My wife works right now, but it's not possible for me to turn on my camera. I don't know why. I'm very sorry, but my question to her, maybe compared with my master thesis, like how do you get in touch with some factors that can influence the socio-technical side of location-based services? Like, for example, you mentioned that you interviewed some people from the, I think, public administration area. So how was your research design of this kind of steps to get in touch, to identify these kind of factors, etc.?
Yeah, so specifically, Björn, in the government domain, you mean?
Yes.
How we approach
exactly.
that was quite a tricky one. So I'm not sure what it's like in Germany, but in Australia you can write to government agencies, federal and state-based government agencies, with a request for statement, and they need to respond within a particular time frame. In the context of our project, what we did was we mapped out in phase 2 an industry-based engagement approach in terms of the public sector or the government agencies. We mapped out another engagement strategy which involved packaging up the information from our initial phases in a way that can be consumed by government entities that are relative to them. So what I mean here, I'd be happy to share some of those templates if they will be of any value to any of you. So it was a request for statement document that set out a range of the scenarios that emerged from our observational studies. We asked them to comment on a range of different aspects, and those that commented, we had major emergency management departments that were at the time involved in using location-based services for bushfires in another state to the state we're in at the moment. We also had our privacy body also respond and set out some really useful information. So in our case, the best point of call in terms of the government was to move away from a verbal interview and ask for a formal request for statement in which we can access through freedom of information and other kinds of processes the required or the relevant information. Hopefully that answers the question. Is that the kind of detail, Björn?
Of course, yeah. It's also quite nice to get some insight of that. And sometimes it's just like it starts to remind me of some of your theories and papers which I read in the last weeks. And but for now, it's fine. I'm just thinking about some topic. I will be returned later.
No problem.
Okay, so if I may step in with a question, you on one slide you showed us this how you actually provided end users with this track stick, and you observed them kind of carrying it and asked them about what it felt like to them when they used it. So you actually worked with a real thing that already existed. Yeah. So compared to that, in some of our students' studies, they will deal with fictitious LBS apps. So apps that don't exist yet and that might maybe exist in the future. And I would just like to know what kind of approach you would take with some fictitious stuff instead of something that's already existing or that's already real. Like, do you think future behavior is kind of observable, or do you think it's very hard to do research on this?
What a great question. That's an excellent question. So we have had other projects, not specific to location-based services, but using the exact same methodologies where we only had things from a conceptual perspective. So when we map out these processes, particularly the co-design and participatory approaches, what we do is we try to pinpoint what phase of the development process it's at. So I've got a project, for instance, at the moment that's similar to what you're describing, where there's not really a technological artifact that we can play with, but we still need user feedback because we want to get their feedback around a concept. And what we do in that case is you can use a range of different techniques. You can use storyboarding, you can use different kinds of design thinking and other participatory approaches to map something out. Now, it's really context specific. So if you have, for instance, wireframes that describe the information elements, so the information architecture of a system, then you would approach it a particular way because you can actually readily show something. Other approaches could just involve giving a concept and asking people to design the interfaces. But I guess in all of the scenarios, there has to be guidance from a design, what we call facilitator in the design space. I don't think I have the slide readily available, but perhaps we can talk a bit about it. So when we're trying to map out different participatory approaches, we have a matrix in how we engage with people. And you can have someone from an observer, for example, or an informant, right through to a co-design partner. We can actually configure how we ask for engagement and the degree of input based on what we're trying to achieve. In the case where a technological solution doesn't exist, you'd need to configure that around something that is more conceptual, but still be quite specific in what you're asking them to do. So in our case, here's a track stick and we're going to collect data. It's very different to, we don't have a solution, but here's a concept, right? So it's a lot more hands-on, I think, if it's conceptual, because you need to provide framing and guidance. In the project that I was referring to that I'm involved in at the moment, we're trying to develop a lower limb robotic exoskeleton using the exact same approaches in this project. In that case, it's for the individuals who are 65 years and older. They don't know what a robotic exoskeleton in most cases look like. There's no concept around it. So what we did was we found some commercially available solutions that were quite generic. We created a packaged primer presentation in which we showed them the features and elements, and then we solicited their feedback using technology acceptance and other kinds of supplementary methodologies to allow them to comment on the right areas, because they're not engineers, right? They're not technologists, but we still need their feedback into those processes. Is that helpful as a response? So it's quite contextual, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful because, yeah, you're totally right. It depends on the context, and what I find very interesting is that it's always good to kind of provide the participants of your study with something that kind of resembles the concept, and that makes it like sort of imaginable or touchable or anything like that, even though the final product or something doesn't exist. So like if we had the resources to like have some designers design like graphic designers design some sort of a prototype of an app, what it might look like, or just design some prototypes of screenshots of an app, that would already maybe help in some of our surveys that we're gonna put through. Maybe we'll just talk about these questions later when we're hearing about the projects themselves. Like one is about a Corona app, or like I don't know whether you heard of the German or European Corona warning app, and we're thinking about how this could be enhanced and supported by location-based services as well, and what extra uses could be made of that. And we also have projects on like a kind of fictitious app on local news and local news collections that can be provided to the end user. So we'll just keep this in mind, and this thing about like how to deal with fictitious apps in research projects, and talk about this later when our students will present on their topics.
That would be great. And it's not uncommon as well to have these fictitious scenarios as a precursor to the design process, because you have to start somewhere. The trick, and I guess the balance, without talking too much on it now, the balance is not providing too much information if you require a full-blown co-design. So if you are co-designing with participants, how do you provide them with sufficient information without swaying their opinion? Because it's that very fine line. But I look forward to hearing more about the student projects. Shall I stop sharing my screen in that case to allow to hide the presentation?
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so now my microphone is working. Could you go back to the methodology slide? That would be awesome, because I've got a question regarding to this.
The theoretical foundations or the phases, Rebecca?
It was the phases. So you did your analysis on, it was this one. I'm not sure if I got it correctly, but how did you do the observation with the users? Did you say you used a quantitative and qualitative analysis, and based on this you did the interviews with with people from the industry and the government? But could you explain the first phase again? That would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to. I skipped obviously a lot of the detail here in the interest of time, Rebecca, but just on this next slide, this is essentially what was achieved in the observation. So by observation of users, we didn't actually follow users around in your traditional HCI style observations, the human computer interaction one, where you have, for instance, a screen and then the users and you track eye movements. It wasn't that kind of observation. We observed their logging, or the logs that they produced. So in the first instance, let's focus maybe on the quantitative first of all. We equipped users with either an in-vehicle location tracking device or logging device, or a handheld one, and that's what they looked like in 2009, basically. And
so if you did this. Sorry if I may interrupt just a second. If you did this now, you could just, you might just need to install some certain app on their smartphone to do the logging. So you wouldn't need any of those devices anymore, would you?
Sure. Well, they behave in a different way. So there are still these devices for fleet management. At the time that this came out, interestingly, we were toying around with the idea of, I'm not sure if any of you recall Google Latitude had come out as a location-based social networking app, and then it was discontinued. So we were considering whether we use that, but we thought we just wanted something that didn't require an interface, didn't require any configuration on the part of the user. But you're absolutely right. We could have chosen any number of devices, but that I think would have affected, we might have had to run multiple studies, because things with an interface behave very differently to those that you can forget about. So most of our reflections, we found that users forgot about the devices after a certain amount of time. So these data logging devices collected things such as longitude, latitude, time information, altitude, and so on. So that was the quantitative element, and we were able to just here, Rebecca, you can probably see, import the data into geographic information systems or a system and run spatial queries to develop a range of scenarios. So the quantitative element is here. The qualitative element was done strategically or deliberately in order to say these are the scenarios that we're able to develop based on our spatial queries and analysis. We then had a manual reflection log which sort of sat on top, where they described with the contextual information almost like the corresponding scenarios and their reflections on using the location tracking devices. And then we overlaid those in our analysis. So we had thematic coming from here, and we had a range of spatial scenarios based on, at the time, Emergency Management Australia's risk spectrum. So we had a minor or low risk, ranging through to scenarios to a high and catastrophic, and we used our real data to represent those risks, void of that narrative contextual details. Stemming from that, we had a range of geospatial scenarios, which we then fed back on that earlier slide, fed into phase 2 and asked our industry representatives to comment not only on the spatial scenarios, but sort of in parallel, we were doing a study of existing regulatory instruments, so regulations at both state and federal level, and we asked them to comment on each and to propose how we can address some of perhaps the concerns or the observations, the concerns or observations that were represented both in the geospatial scenarios. At that time, we had a lot of governments using geospatial evidence in court to either incriminate an individual, and sometimes they were incorrect. We observed some discrepancies as well with our participants. We were able to model some quite sinister scenarios just based on participant data. And when you look at that versus the reflections, you see this disparity between the two. So that's how it looked. It was quantitative from the perspective of geospatial and thematic from the perspective of our reflections. And then we funneled that in. We had sort of this funnel diagram that showed funneling of information into consumable industry-based and government-based scenarios as well. Rebecca, if you can unmute and let me know if you'd like more detail about any aspect of that.
I think that's fine so far. Thank you for your explanation again.
Thank you. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, as well for your interesting question. So I think it's quite good that we still have your presentation on here. So in case you need to move forward or backward, and to clarify some things about
Sure.
it, it's still right to have it here. Yeah. Any other questions from our course? Okay, no further questions from Rebecca. Björn, you wanted to add something?
Yes, maybe one question, touching like the kind of usable situation, or the situation with the spectrum of usable security, regarding and also contextualized by the fact that some business models are based on the trade of data. We talked about it in the interview, but during my study also it became for me apparent that it's quite an interesting part. On the one hand, that companies, and especially like third parties, etc., are willing to gain a lot of data from the apps, from the etc., and they design them in a very open, nearly unsecure environment, so they can collect amount of data from the persons. And that is also kind of part of my question, like how is there a way to implement kind of usable principles or socio and ethical factors? And maybe you can elaborate one or two ideas on that, and that would be quite interesting, maybe also for some of our groups.
That's a great question, Björn. I remember we spoke about this in your study of the usable data security. You're absolutely right, and I haven't even touched on those elements. So you mentioned a few important points, I think, that I'll draw out and highlight here that I think might be useful for students in designing these apps. So we've got one aspect that you mentioned, which was around trade-off. Yes. The trade-off concept is quite common, and we've been doing a lot of work in my colleague that you've met, I think, by correspondence, Professor Katina Michael from Arizona State University, doing a lot of work around the COVID-19 contact tracing app. And I did notice one of your students, the project title is around, as you mentioned, COVID-19, how to improve the apps, whether to include the location element. In the context of COVID-19 more specifically, or location-based services even in a broader sense, we're always presented, or we seem to be presented from an industry, or in the case of COVID-19 apps, a government perspective with a trade-off concept. So when we talk about trade-offs, and this will lead to my second point that I'd like to highlight, when we present it with something that is a trade-off-based concept, so you're told you need to trade your privacy for security, your privacy for health, your privacy for national security. As soon as you place an app or something in a competitive kind of position, and in terms of a trade-off basis, I think from a public confidence and trust perspective, especially for large-scale systems, we've almost lost the argument. That's the first point about trade-off. So we're always saying it's either this or that. That's called zero sum. So if you look at the literature, I think your students will actually be really interested in this. There's an argument around zero sum, which means that you can either have this or that. You can either have privacy, you can either have security, or you can have, safety for LBS, for emergency management, for example, or for a COVID-19 location-based tracking app. If you want your safety, if you want your health, you're going to trade your privacy, you're going to trade your security. Now, that's one aspect. The second aspect you mentioned is there a better way to do it? And I haven't even pointed to some of the value-based design approaches which have been implemented in the literature, being implemented in a range of spaces. So you have privacy and security by design, you have trust by design, which is an emergent model as well, where there's this necessary shift in emphasis where we say we don't have to think of things in zero sum. but there's an alternate methodology, which is called a positive sum approach, where you say we can have both by building in a number of principles into our design. So let's look at privacy by design. If you look at privacy by design as a philosophy of design as applied to location-based services, we're told that we need to have privacy as the default, right? So privacy is the first point of call. Everything has to be on a consent basis. We need openness and transparency, and the list goes on in terms of principles around design. So you mentioned, Björn, that sometimes you feel that these apps are built in an open way deliberately, and these kinds of design philosophies try to prohibit that open not in the sense of open source data, which is good in privacy by design, but open in terms of lacking in usable data security, for example, in the context of your master's project. So I think there are ways we need to move away, personally, this is a subjective viewpoint, from a trade-off concept. We need to engage in values by design, either privacy or security by design-based processes, using some of the participatory approaches that I highlighted in the talk today. So it's participation, it's values, and it's this idea of positive sum rather than zero sum.
That is also quite an interesting point, and because just thinking about the GDPR and also Article 25, there's like privacy by design, it's implemented in the GDPR context. So in that case, a lot of like European companies or companies who are publishing the apps in the European area should also consider these kind of principles. And that's like the thing why it started to make me think about this kind of context. But one last thought of myself, like, and you mentioned this also, like maybe why we can't have like both sides. And maybe there's quite an interesting point when usable security and also these kind of principles from privacy by design could increase the app usage. And so it's became another, like a completely interesting field for companies to create more secure, more usable apps, because this kind of design process could increase the app usage and also the the business models, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did speak about that as well earlier when we had our earlier discussion, didn't we, about redefining, in a sense, business models and moving from that traditional viewpoint that your money making is at their expense or from a trade-off perspective or at the expense of users or at harvesting data, for example. I think you've got a really good point there that there could be a business case for increased usage if you engage in these processes, because you do, I guess, win public confidence. So I think about, for instance, the COVID-19 app in Australia that was implemented. The app itself was built on a privacy by design basis. We engaged in a number of studies around that. And before the release of the app, so when there was word in mid-April that the app was going to be released, and we wrote a paper for The Conversation, my colleague and I, around the app is great if it serves a purpose to help in the context of a pandemic. If we're not going to use technology for good in that context, when are we going to call on the power of technology, right? But we also said without some of the principles of privacy by design, without public trust, without openness, the app is, somewhat redundant, because it opens up the potential for misinformation. You don't have a sense around values, around, sometimes it just becomes a marketing exercise to get the communication out there in a way to say that this is built on a privacy by design basis. This is voluntary. This is going to help you. We are not infringing on your privacy. These are the supportive laws, which is where this work that I presented here comes in. So we've got the laws in place. You're protected. It's useful within a defined scope, within a defined period of time. We will not infringe on that. It's very different to come out and say, we're in a pandemic, quickly download the app, and we can't tell you much more, right? So that's what we mean by socio-technical, is that the design of the app itself and its deployment from beginning to end needs to embed ethics, needs to embed values, needs to think about these things as precursors. So we can no longer do what we traditionally do, tinker with apps and go, the app's ready, let's test. Particularly with large-scale systems, right? You're not going to get the downloads in the case of the COVID-19 apps. I mean, in Germany, I think, was it Corona Warn? Is that the app there?
Yes.
I think that was arguably more successful than in other contexts, right? It was one of sort of the success stories at one point in Europe, right? Whereas you have some cases that just collapsed because of that lack of transparency. But maybe you can talk more to that.
Yes,
it's the general sentiment there.
It was quite a huge project to implement this kind of app in Germany, and the main point, I think maybe my colleagues will also agree on that. The main problem in Germany is there's not enough downloads for this app and also to have
and everywhere is the case. So that's all right. You need a certain uptake.
Even though our government made specific that it's all voluntarily, that there are no concerns about intruding into your privacy or something like that. And the whole process has been very, very transparent, but still, I think we had 22 million downloads of the app, so that's about a quarter of the German population, and they still say about 50 to 60% have to download and use it regularly, so that it really has a proper effect and helps, especially the health institutions to support the health institutions in contact tracing and stuff like that. So I mean, I think it's pretty successful here in Germany compared to other European countries as well. It's been quite a fail. In inverted commas, in France or also kind of in Italy, but
Italy had several. Italy had several different apps, and there was a collection of them. You're right. Yeah.
So the German Corona One app is kind of a role model in terms of other countries in the EU want to adopt it, and so that contact tracing via the app can be possible across borders as well. And some countries have already joined in, but there's still a lot at stake, and it's still gonna take a lot of patience and time until there is a coherent strategy in this.
Yeah, I think you made some really, really good points about the download statistics and rates for a inverted comma successful implementation. First of all, when they released the figures around that, you had some quoting the 40%, some quoting the 60%. There were studies coming out of England, studies coming out of Australia. They weren't really consistent in what would constitute appropriate downloads. Now, there's a few issues with the whole download. So downloads don't necessarily mean usage. So the downloads tell us nothing. People can download multiple applications. You can have some devices. So I know from the Australian situation, our COVID Safe app, the equivalent of Corona Warn, did not work initially on the iPhone related iOS devices. There were some bugs initially which found out, and that was fine. You also had a language barrier here because of the multicultural population, so that was an accessibility issue. Older phone models didn't allow for the downloads. So even if you're looking for percentage, exactly right. And that would be across the board internationally, I guess. So if we're looking at percentage of downloads, are we looking at percentage of active handset users or smartphone users? Are we looking at percentage of the entire population? In which case, you're creating automatically this digital divide between the people that have and that don't. And now we're finding ourselves, for example, in Australia discussing whether people, at one point we were discussing this, but now they've got alternatives. We're discussing whether we need the app to enter public places, such as restaurants, and as we sort of ease the lockdown measures, it was positioned as a way to allow us to alleviate some of these measures, like download the app if you want to go out. But then they found that not everyone had the app, so now we've reverted in public places to QR codes and manual logs in addition to the app. So it's really hard to actually assess the success of these apps when there are so many unknowns. So accessibility was an issue, usability was an issue. The technology actually was improved and the bugs were ironed out, but we're still not dealing with the entire population. That's the only issue. So we have this, I guess, accessibility barrier that will be interesting to see what happens beyond this, in terms of particularly in Germany, where the cases are rising and they're quite considerable at the moment.
Or same in the US. I just read that some of the US states just recently brought in the app, but there's still many states who don't have them, that don't have it at all. So I really hope that the whole situation is going to get better there by also by getting the app work in the whole country. But I think as soon as the app works perfectly, the pandemic will be over.
Yeah, I have a sense that might be the case, and a vaccine might be by then.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is that there's no perfect technology, right? You'll have issues with the Bluetooth, you'll have the issues with connectivity. If you're using the operating system-based contact tracing, things, other issues come into being. So I guess perfection isn't our goal. Our goal is to sort of whatever helps to spread through consideration of these issues that we spoke about that are not necessarily technical, right? So most of the things we've mentioned, as you can see, they're social things, and these social continue being important regardless of the technology. So we've observed the exact same outcomes, I guess, whether we're developing an app for children, developing an exoskeleton for the elderly, or engaging in, we've done projects, conceptual projects around swallowable endoscopic capsules. So how do we do the whole endoscopy process through a swallowable chip? And the issues are still the same. So you've got the technology, and optimizing the technology is one thing, but these other issues that I guess define to some degree the success are not technical at all, which is why we're sort of trying to push this socio-technical environmental notion, because it's a better representation of what's actually happening in reality, I guess.
I have the fear that pain and grief has to rise until more people really feel the need to like install the app. And unfortunately, not too many people, or not enough people use it as a preemptive thing, but they might then install it when it's already kind of too late.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with these things. Again, downloads or installs don't mean use, right? So, and there's no way to tell really, but let's see how it plays out. It's an interesting, I guess, case, because we had a scenario where you've got the same, let's call it problem or challenge, and you've had different countries responding in different ways, and they're continuing to do so. So at one point, Australia was considering whether they'd use Google and Apple's exposure notification framework, whether that was a better model than, a centralized system. So our system would send data off confirmed cases to Amazon Web Services. So that was a central store, and it was only accessed by state government, and federal government had no idea about the how many cases were being picked up and so on. So there's a lot of, I think, things to iron out at the moment before really evaluating how successful these apps are.
That's right.
I'd have another question if that topic's finished. Okay. As you probably noticed, taking a look at the project titles, which I sent you, quite a lot of them have this journalistic component to them, so location-based journalism. Now, I'd like to know from your point of view, to what extent can LBS enrich journalism in particular? I know this is not a too specific question, but maybe you can put the focus a bit on this journalistic area as well.
Sure. We've had a discussion, you and I, about local media and journalism and things like that. I think there's definitely a role for these technologies. So one thing I like to emphasize, because sometimes it can really appear when you engage in any social-based or socio-technical-based studies that you're trashing the technology or the technology is not important. But I think in journalism, in media and regional areas and so on, there's definitely a potential for it. Just depends how carefully they're planned out, what purposes they're used for, and the structures that underpin them. So I don't know if you want to have this discussion based on the projects we have, or if you have a more specific question. I think there's definitely potential in that realm, but unless we engage in participatory consultative processes and we're factoring in the technology itself, the people who'll be using it, and also the government legislating, and we do so simultaneously, I think you might run into the same issues as you would with any kind of LBS implementation. I recall when we did this work, we focused quite a lot on the location, obviously, component. As I said, it serves that really important bridge between the online world and the physical presence, because you've got an actual physical location on the Earth's surface, right, in your longitude, latitude, altitude coordinates. So it becomes quite problematic if there aren't the necessary structures in place. So to answer your question, sort of short, I think there's a lot of potential in from a journalism perspective, but unless we engage in this multi-tiered perspective and consider the values of people in relation to this, uptake might be questionable, I guess.
Okay. Thank you. I think from this we can make a good transition into the presentations themselves now.
Sure.
Let's take a look. Group 1.
Yeah, we thought that now to our course that we should just have you groups present in a chronological order, like from group 1 to group 6. So we'd like to ask the members of group 1 who would like to present.
That would be me.
Okay, that's Ida. So I'll make you a presentator as well. Hang
Perfect,
on.
thanks.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there you go. So now you can either just share your screen, which would be the fastest way, or you can upload your presentation as well, or might be just 1 or 2 slides.
And also
Yeah, I think
be
that'll be
free
quick.
to share your camera with us.
Right.
I'd love to, but the quality of my camera is not quite good. So I didn't want to overstress my internet. That's okay. First of all, hello and good morning, or rather good evening to you, Ms. Roba Abbas. I also wanted to, and I think I can speak for the rest of the course for now. I wanted to thank you for granting us such inspiring insight into your studies. It was very interesting and I think also very helpful for our own projects. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to speak from my group, no problem, which includes Luisa, Becky, Luke, and Paula, and myself. So yeah, we'd like to also tell you a little bit of our own project. We prepared a small presentation just so that it might be a little easier to grasp what our research will be about and what we'd like to examine. You can hear me quite well and see the presentation, I assume? Okay, perfect. So first of all, our idea kind of developed by reflecting on past lectures and seminars. We talked about various kinds of location-based services and how those kind of applications are currently or were already adopted in the field of journalism. So we try to connect the dots there, and after reading a lot about the integration of LBS in journalism, we decided to focus on the identification of success factors in mobile journalism. So putting all those pieces together, we came up with the following title, which you can see, and that would be the success factors for mobile journalism, an empirical analysis of the behavioral intention towards the integration of location-based services in local journalism. And our idea is therefore kind of based on a practical approach or a practical development for the future, maybe. With our study, we want to find out how a location-based news app that integrates and it distributes news depending on the whereabouts of the user would be adopted among the public. And that kind of information we'd assume would be obtained from various online news platforms. So speaking for the theoretical approaches that relies in our work on an intensive literature review about the field of location-based services and local journalism. And furthermore, due to our focus on the behavioral intention, we took a closer look at the unified theory of acceptance and use of technology as the basis for our own causal model. Plus, the diffusion of innovations theory was also taken into account in our research because of the gain perspective for different kind of behavior towards innovations, specifically in the regards of information technology. So, and concerning the methodology, we decided for an online survey, so that would be of a quantitative nature, considering hopefully representative results in the end. We'll see. And combining all those insights from existing literature and applications of the UTAUT model, as well as our own results of our research, we want to find answers to the research questions, which you can also see under the title of research interest. I'm just going to read them out loud for now. Which factors influence behavioral intention towards location-based services in local journalism? And furthermore, to what extent do these factors influence the behavioral intention towards LBS in local journalism? I hope that gave you an insight into our research, just as an overview, but we also didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to show you our causal model. Maybe that makes it a little more understandable. So on the left, you can see that we adopted the independent variables derived from the original extended version of the UTAUT model, as well as applications and adoptions of it. And on the right, we included a variable that is called adoption affinity, which was derived from the diffusion of innovations theory. And we expect all those kind of independent variables to have a significant impact on the dependent variable, the behavioral intention, and of course, to what extent. Yeah, that's already it. It was really quick. I'm sorry. We were told that we've only got 5 minutes, but I hope that gave you an overview of what we're about to do or what we've already done. If you have any questions, don't hesitate and I'll try to answer. But I hope that was helpful for now.
That was such a wonderful overview and so clearly expressed, Ida. It was a very, very interesting project, first of all. It's really hard, I guess, to explain all of these models and your approach to it in such a defined space of time. I think you did really well. Are we hearing all presentations or can we give feedback now? Can we have a bit more of a discussion about it? What's the general idea? Would you like me to just ask questions now?
The idea is to discuss them right after they were presented. I think that's
perfect.
Because otherwise, we would forget what had been said.
Not a problem. So not a collective discussion, more specifically. I've just got a few questions, Ida, if I may, just around representation. And so I think the focus you said, or the unit of analysis, was around consumers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And sort of subset, are you looking at, what are you looking at in terms of representation? Have you derived figures for how many surveys you'll declare a representative sample as, or not as yet?
Sorry, maybe my connection isn't as good. Could you just repeat it, please?
Of course, yeah, not a problem. I was asking about representation in terms of sample size. So you've got your consumer category. When you release your survey, how many surveys are you after at the moment?
So we're going to do one online survey with about, let me guess, about 15 questions, and we hope to get a representative amount of about 200, 250 respondents maybe. And I think, yeah, or maybe I hope, or we hope that that is attainable.
Sure. And assuming you're looking at within a particular geographic region, is that correct? Or are you just opening it up to just to a wider response group? How have you defined your inclusion-exclusion criteria for what makes someone a valid respondent or participant?
Actually, no, we thought about that in the beginning, but considering that we are hoping to obtain results for news app that is based on the location of the user, of the end user, the potential end user, we decided to focus on not on a specific region, and therefore we thought about first and foremost considering also that it's a technology and we'd like to make it attainable to more a younger group with a specific technical affinity. So we decided to first and foremost spread it via social media and to a lot of students at the Ostfalia as well.
That's a great starting point. I think so. You're mainly looking, I think, is it at innovators or more early adopters in your diffusion of innovation curve, I guess?
Exactly.
Sure. And just beyond this project, because it seems like a really good project, Ida, and thank you also to the other group members here. Do you think of going beyond that? Because I think it'll be really interesting as an extension. I do realize this is a very contained project and it needs to be sort of consumable and digestible within an academic setting. But I think there'd be value even in going into other categories, because I suspect that obviously you'd find different outcomes in terms of behavioral intention and the variables associated with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially considering that we are all about to march up on our master thesis in a few months. So there's definitely a lot of potential, I think, going into deeper research in that regard. And also because in the beginning of the seminar, we thought it that we have to kind of put a practical approach on this project. Now, considering that it is more theoretical, we think we'd just wait up the results, but hopefully we are going to obtain representative results with which we can go on and deepen the research area in that regard, and maybe even develop a kind of prototype for the future, because we examined the market a bit, and we thought that a news app of that kind would be very helpful and very up to date, and we haven't found an existing news app of that kind yet.
Yep, no, that's great. I think it's such a worthwhile project, a really well thought out one as well. I mean, it is contained, as you said, for the practical elements and practical reasons that you mentioned. Just as you were speaking in terms of the sources as being online news platforms, I'm wondering whether that can be just maybe as you head towards a prototype, further examined in looking at alternate news sources as well. Because I think sometimes with these location-based services and other kinds of such services, you might be able to use them from an empowering perspective or lens, where you allow user-generated and other content, particularly if you go down the regional path, or you're speaking about it within the context of your university. I think having additional or supplementary features that enable content or contextual information beyond just online platforms might be helpful, just as a future sort of direction. But other than that, it's a very impressive project. It seems a lot more mature than a university-based subject. This looks like an industry-based / high-level research project. So well done to the team. It's very impressive.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for that point. We also thought that, considering that this news app might be developed in the future, that it would be of great help to include a kind of algorithm that obtains a
the information that we want to include in this kind of news app from all journalistic content that is available online, and that would, of course, be also possible to obtain more from blogs or social media accounts that goes beyond the news platforms that are official. I'll call them official now for now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're very right. No, thank you for presenting your project again. It's very well put together.
Thank you.
May I just add one thing? As we talked about it recently, like Ida and Luisa and the rest of the group, I think it would be, because Roba mentioned it before, it would be quite good if you kind of could include not just only young people, or mainly young people who are the early adopters, but if you could try and reach out in your online survey to some late adopters as well, just to at least to have a comparison between these two groups. I mean, I think because you can't really cover all groups of people, all kinds of adopters, but if you have at least a comparable group of early adopters and late adopters in your sample, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, sorry, Ida, go for it.
No, please go on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was also thinking while you were discussing this, it just had the cogs in my head turning. I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting once you finish this project, if you decide, for instance, in master's level or so on, to pursue this further, to go beyond the quantitative as well? Because I think there might be value in what we're saying here of looking at the late adopters or the laggards and those who would usually conform to the late majority or early majority. Because right now, I think you might be sitting obviously in the innovators/early adopters kind of category, but it would be fascinating to get even a more rich narrative, qualitative feedback as to what prohibits someone from falling into those early adoption categories, even if it's within the student group, for example. So you could have within that student cohort or within your young people, those who are the late adopters. It doesn't necessarily have to be an age-specific thing, but within that younger age bracket, or, you know, the generation that you're looking in, what defines or what pushes people beyond the quantitative insights that you get? What pushes them from a rich narrative, thought, logic perspective to either adopt or choose to adopt or exhibit certain kind of behaviors versus not within the frame of the diffusion of innovation theory? I think that'll be super fascinating. I'd like to know the outcome. Either way, please do reach out once you finish this project. I'd love to have a look at where you get with it, basically.
You'll get to hear about the outcome of every single study here. Definitely, we'll make sure.
We'd love it, and I'm just thinking the work that's been done here is it seems like a really, as I said, a very impressive level. It's so well thought out. I mean, I'm not going to preempt, I haven't seen all the group work, but if this is how the assessments or these projects have been structured, please reach out. Maybe we can look at publication opportunities as well. If you're collecting, 200 or, 250, who's to say that we can't publish pilot study related things? If not, for instance, in the transactions that I work for, we've got sort of a magazine version or other outlets that I think would love this kind of fresh research, basically. So please do keep in touch, Ida, and also Louisa, and we have Rebecca as well in the team. I think that's the team, is it?
Yeah, and Luke and Paula. I think they're also
and
here.
Luke, yes.
We're fine.
Oh, great. Welcome, everyone. No problem. So all of you, please do reach out. I'll just pop my email again in the chat window. I'd love to hear from you. I had some students who have just finished, but they were first-year students who were doing design similar to this. But some of them were doing around the Sustainable Development Goals, and some were LBS related, others were not. In an information systems class, and we were able to encourage them to go through and present at conferences as well. So that's another, I guess, outlet. I think it's really important that work like this is out and published and visible, because it is important work. And I think an extension to the work that we did in Australia, this seems to be setting the stage for some excellent work around areas that traditionally aren't considered as well. So you've got the journalism, media, regional aspects, they tend to not be as emphasized as the more traditional applications of LBS. So well done to everyone in this team.
Thank you. And thank you for your input.
Thank you, Ida. Thank you to the team as well.
Okay, then let's move on to our second group, Marlene, Alena, and Franziska.
Yes.
Who of you would like to be presenting?
Yeah, I will hold the presentation.
Then you're very welcome to do so. So here you got the commanding options now.
Okay.
So you might. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. I'm gonna upload it real quick.
Roba, I just wanted to make sure, are you still having enough time to stay a little longer than maybe expected? Like,
I think I might be able to stay for another half an hour, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Would we get in? Yeah, sorry, I've got young kids and
yeah, I know what it's like. So really sorry for keeping you away from them.
But if any of your groups would like other feedback, they're more than welcome to get in touch, and we can even do another session of this. It's no problem at all.
All right. So we just try and get through the presentations as quickly as possible, and maybe try, even though it's very interesting to get larger feedback, but maybe we'll try to keep the feedback rounds very short as well, so that everyone can participate with their presentation.
No problem. Got it.
My laptop just hung.
Here we go.
Okay, here we go. At first sight, it might seem like we're doing the same thing like Ida's group, but I think it differs a little bit because we also looking at factors influencing the willingness of recipients to use location-based services in journalism. But when we first talked about what we are going to do in this project, we assumed that the content may also play a relevant role in this. So we came to the research question, which factors have an influence on the willingness to use location-based services in journalism, and what role does content play in this? And we're also going to do a survey on recipients. We are also going to approximately have a sample of 250 to 300 people from all federal states in Germany. And we will also have a boost sample, I think it is the right word for this, from a smaller city called Helmstedt in Niedersachsen?
Lower Saxony.
Lower Saxony. To have a regional focus on this as well. Yeah, and maybe I show the next page. Yeah. As a theoretical construct, we will also be based on UTAUT, but we will supplement this with the users and gratification approach. And we assume that both will have an impact on the behavioral intention as well as the content. By content, we mean the type of the content, like is it a video or is it an audio data or is it text-based? And formal aspects, is it about sports or about regional matters or about culture, things like that. And we do so because UTAUT has proven to be particularly successful in such studies to look at acceptance of location-based services. But in our opinion, when you want to look at a combination of LBS and journalism, it requires a perspective that also covers motives for media usage, and asks about the influence of content design. So we will use the users and gratification approach, and also the content independent variable. And then we have our control variables, gender, age, level of education, federal, state, and postcode. The postcode we ask for to localize the people from Helmstedt. And this approach also seems very useful to us, because both approaches, UTOUT and users and gratification, seem to be similar and might supplement each other very well, as you can see on the broken line. Like performance expectancy and cognitive motives are similar in how they are constructed, as well as social influence and social interactive motives, and the habit and integrative habitual motives. That was my very short presentation. I hope you understood what we're about to do.
It was an excellent presentation. Do I say your name Malina or Malina?
Malina, fine. That's fine.
How is it pronounced in German? So I can try
Malina.
to get it right. Oh, excellent. Yep.
Yeah.
Malina. So it sounds like an M towards the end.
Malina, somehow. It's really hard to say in English, I think. When I went to America, they always said Marlene, so that's fine for me.
Yeah, it's like Marlene, like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I've got family in Germany, but my German will get there one day. Another very excellent project. I love the emphasis on content. I think it's a really strong one because it just adds another dimension to it. Now, when you speak about the content as being a combination of type and formal aspects, do you consider thinking beyond that around the nature of the content, around validation of content and things like that, or is it quite narrow at the moment in terms of just the type and formal aspects? So I find the focus on type. Sorry, the question was probably not framed well from my end, rather than from yours. So you've got the type of media, whether it's video, images, and so on, and then you've got formal aspects, whether it relates to sport, to culture, to things like that. Will you also be looking at, for instance, the creator of that content? Is that part of the formal aspects, or is that a secondary, maybe a future direction or something like that?
That could be a future direction. We will be looking at which preferences the recipients have when they use LBS in journalism, like, for example, in an app as Ida exposed. And if they will look more at like cultural content, or inform themselves about events or about sports and things like that, and which preference they have, and also which preference in aspects like the type of content they have. Like, would they rather use videos, or would they rather listen to something related to their location?
I think these are really good things to be drawing out, particularly that I think your control variables allow for a wider subset of participants. So it'll be interesting within the gender, age, level of education range, whether some types of types of media are more appropriate for different groups. So I think that's going to be a really helpful one where the literature is concerned here. Thank you for answering that excellent answer. And provided a lot of clarity around it. I might ask one more question, and then just in the interest of time, and that was around your localization to a specific area in Germany. Is that area something that's close by? Is it representative of other areas? So what decisions did you take, or why did you take the decision to focus on that particular localized area? Are you able to generalize later on, or do comparison or comparative studies?
we will focus on Helmstedt because I think Per Ole and
we all
and
told them
Björn will have a project there. I think I remember that they said that there is a lot of potential in that region because it's how you say it, a coal miner region. So it's it has a good structure and potential for location-based services in general. So we, in case of this project that they're doing, we wanted to like enhance our study with this aspect as well. If that answers your question, maybe they can. Okay.
That definitely answers my question. I think it's going to be great because I think you're going to find regions, not just within Germany, that have a similar approach by this study. If anything, it serves as a pilot in which you can refine models. So I can't wait to see the outcomes from this, Marlene. It's going to be really interesting to see how this pans out and what you can take from it to then build into other projects as well. I mean, your sample size, you're looking at 300 for, I'm assuming for an area like that will be sufficiently representative that you can start to draw out, I guess, generalized lessons from it. But thank you so much for sharing that into your group as well.
Thank you very much for your feedback as well.
Thanks so much.
We actually asked them to, we asked all groups to lay the focus on this region of Helmstedt. So you will find the focus on Helmstedt in further presentations as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually, if you can, so if it's intention, then you can utilize the data for your projects as well.
Maybe if I can say something else to the control variables, I think we will have the hypothesis that there will be differences in behavioral intention between gender and age, because we read in some articles that other studies already predicted those differences, that men are more often have a stronger behavioral intention to use LBS, and younger people also. And so we're going to look at that specifically.
I think those hypotheses probably are very wise to set as the foundations for this study. In some of our LBS studies as well, we've used a similar kind of thing by looking to existing literature and doing exactly what you're doing to say that this is what literature has told us. Like, can we validate whether this is true within this particular context? That's fantastic. That's a really good way forward.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback.
No, thanks so much for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene, as well, from all of us. Sorry that we now kind of have to skip through all the other presentations, but we really would like to have everybody to join in and to spread their word. So I'd like to ask the third group, which is dealing with our CoroNavi, that's what it's called, app. The fictitious enhanced Corona app. Who of you will be presenting?
That would be me.
That's great, Sally. I'll just make you presentator. Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to just share your screen, you can just share it. That would be the quickest way. Otherwise, you can also upload your short presentation. Perfect. Screen share.
You to share your camera if you want to.
Sorry?
Would you mind turning on your camera as well, or do you have?
Okay. None.
Yeah.
Start sharing.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we are researching the acceptance of an location-based app, which and if it would benefit the users so the acceptance if it would benefit the health of the user or the health of family and friends. Yeah, so the background is that in Germany we have like overall rules of how to behave during the Corona crisis. But still all 16 federal states are able to adapt those rules to their liking. Therefore, a lot of people in Germany are unsure how to behave in different parts of Germany. And yes, that's why we thought an app which consolidates all rules and measures and shows it to the user using location tracking would be a great way to maybe reduce fear or also uncertainty towards the coronavirus, but also towards like traveling within Germany. Yeah, and we are also conducting a survey using the UTAUT model, where our personal focus lies on the acceptance of using location tracking for that app, but also the fear and the uncertainty of the user, if that would be reduced and if they would behave differently if they have such a consolidated app. We also, so that's a really basic prototype of the app, which we included in our survey to visualize what we had in mind. So you can see here, my location is Braunschweig, and we also, and it shows our current Corona cases and how it increased from yesterday and the 7-day incidence value. If you click down there, you can see current measures and rules. So you know exactly how to behave when you get into Braunschweig. And then we have a little section under there which shows actual and current and Corona news. Yeah. So that's the fictional app we planned. And yeah, we already started the survey and it's already online. So we're waiting the answers at the moment. Yeah.
I love the prototypes. It looks so realistic, and I think would be helpful for conceptualizing as well, conceptualizing the purpose, I guess, of the app. Thank you for that presentation, Sally, and so well presented and so clear as well in terms of your intention and what you're trying to do. It reminded me of a study that we were just involved with around the Australian app, where we were looking at similarly the acceptance of the app itself, but there was no location dimension to it. What I think might be interesting as a secondary point of call in terms of your study is to think about whether an assessment of the legislation around the apps would affect people's intention to use them if there's a location element. I suspect, based on the work that we've done, that the legal elements will also need to be considered in addition to what you've already considered around the unified technology acceptance models and things like that. But that might emerge from, I guess, as a post kind of study. But I think you might find that sort of the legal dimension is something that might warrant additional consideration in this context. So what you have is you've got technological progression and the usage of apps and things like that. They work at quite a rapid rate. And then you have the legislative environment that tends to lag behind. But that legislative/regulatory environment really impacts on what happens in terms of usage, particularly when location comes into play, or at least that's what studies have shown. I really like that. In terms of your prototype, and if you decide to take this forward, because I see this as being something that would be useful beyond the pandemic. In any case that requires some kind of health or emergency response. So my only comment, apart from what a great concept and a well put together study, is why not consider longevity of the app? Because we hope that the pandemic will not stay for much longer. I mean, we still have a long road ahead, but beyond that, how can the app be repurposed for alternate contexts? And you might find that in the emergency public health scenario, this app would be perfect. Now, you mentioned things around cases, news, and things like that as being part of your prototype. When you transition to a more generalized model, I've seen in some cases and done some research around it, an app like that also focuses on well-being, I think will be crucial in the case of the pandemic and also beyond. But apart from that, I'm very interested to see what your survey results, what comes out of them, I guess. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No,
so I guess Roba has already outlined the contents of your chapter on future research that will be included in your research
I think
paper.
it's so valuable. And what I got my class to do is whenever they were doing an app of this kind was to try to, or not just apps, any kind of system that has some kind of social value, to think about it in terms of its immediate goal and what it serves to achieve, but to think of this context specific, such as your app. We always hope to develop technology. It could serve a purpose, but beyond this very specific purpose, how can it be used? How can it be repurposed? I think as future direction, that'd be great. So you've got the legal elements, Sally. You've got the app itself. You've got future direction in terms of design and design best practice. And I would even suggest maybe as a future research goal to think about values-based design principles in how you toggle certain functionality in that app. So I'm assuming because there's a location element, you've got to have the opportunity for people to be able to switch between granting permission for their location and not. So not in all cases are we going to want our location tracked. So there needs to be the option to allow people to be able to work within that frame, and also to make sure that any data that's collected is utilized and distributed in the most appropriate manner. But I look forward to seeing where you go with this, Sally, and your team as well.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sally, as well. And now we'd like to move on. I still hope that you have at least 10 minutes left, Roba.
Sure.
We move to the qualitative studies in our course now. And I'd like to hand over to Birte. Great.
Hi.
Perfect. So
Hello.
here you go. You can just share your screen now or upload your short presentation.
Yeah, I hope that you can hear me.
Yeah, we can. There's
okay.
a bit of blur in the sound, but not too much.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So I think Dennis will share his screen.
Okay.
Yeah, but let me introduce you to our topic. Our topic is LBS couponing, and we would like to analyze the potential of LBS couponing in terms of catering, culture, and events. And to do so, okay, so maybe he's not sharing, so I will do it. One moment. Okay, he's doing it. Yeah, so to do so, we firstly need to evaluate the social acceptance of a fictional mobile application. So Dennis, you can switch to the second. Yeah, thank you. And for this purpose, we came up with an app called Peter's Surf and Turf. It can be used by, for example, restaurants, museums, theaters, etc. And when it is used by a restaurant, the app uses LBS to send push notifications to the smartphone of someone passing the restaurant, and the service offers a special coupon, for example, buy one, get two, or get 50% off. And with our research, we want to evaluate the potential of an app like this. So will people use it, or will restaurants and other businesses use it? And then our third point, our theoretical approach. And we plan to do a qualitative survey in terms of focus group discussions. It made sense to us to draw on the following theories. So the diffusion of innovations, the UTAUT, which is used by almost every group, and last but not least, the two-step flow of communication. And we are currently almost done with our research and have written the theoretical chapters. And for our focus group discussions, we would like to interview 5 employees of each industry, so culture, catering, and events, so that we have 3 interviews overall. And respectively, 2 of us will lead at least 1 interview, except for me, as I will participate in 2 discussions. And our next steps, we have to contact the different businesses and request potential participants for our qualitative survey. And we set a deadline for the 4th of December. So, and after that we can start with the interviews. That's it.
Thank you, Berta. It's such a good one. We're moving on to qualitative, which is great. I think is this the only qualitative study in the class?
Oh, there will be 2 more qualitative studies as well.
Okay.
But this is the only one which involves focus groups.
Excellent. I think it's such a good, again, another interesting concept. What I like about each of these projects is, although you're using consistent theories, so we've had diffusion of innovation before, the unified technology acceptance is quite a popular one as well. There's a different angle to each of the projects, which I think makes for some interesting outcomes. I really love the idea of you looking at whether push notifications will work before actually developing a prototype. I think that's a healthy way of doing it, rather than developing the prototype and then seeing whether it works or not. So that's great. I really liked your presentation as well. It was so clear. So thank you for doing that. I'm learning a lot from your presentations as well, which I think is very important. I love the work in the LBS space. I've been in it for so long, but these are such fresh concepts as well. I really enjoy the regional focus. I've just got a few questions, I guess, just for clarification around the focus groups. In your focus groups, is it semi-structured? Will you be guiding it heavily with questions? Or would you do a sort of hybrid approach where you have the questions and then you have a free-flowing conversation? I'm just interested in finding out more.
Yeah, sure. So we already have some questions which will be used for the interviews. And these questions always, or they are quite the same, so that we can get results that we can
compare.
Compare. Thank you. That we
Sure.
compare, even though there are 3 businesses. Yeah. And,
no, that's fantastic. I think that's very wise, that consistent element across questions.
Yeah, and I think we will finalize the questions in the next week. But yeah, they are already out there, and maybe we use them just as they are, and maybe we work on some little points.
No, that sounds great. I guess with the questions, if I may suggest, maybe bringing in some principles from something like privacy by design. If you just do a search around that and you look at the principles that are the basic tenets for that, I wonder if your focus group participants are more inclined to see the value of this LBS couponing system that you're suggesting, if it's built on the basis of those principles. I'm not sure if you wanted to include, if you have the scope to do that now, some of those questions, since it is qualitative, because I think that might give you an advantage if you tend to build on it into the future, Berta, but by looking at what the acceptance of these systems or the value of those are with just the regular questions that you have, and then if there are privacy enhancing features, what that might include. Now you're focusing, I think, on the industries themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. At some stage, I think doing a sort of hybrid study where you extend this to be around, for example, the consumers and the privacy controls. I think control is going to be a major aspect with push notifications. So the amount of control that the actual user has from a usability perspective over, including their preferences, having their preferences catered for, the ability to provide their location versus not, just in some of the similar comments to the previous groups as well. I think it'll be interesting to get their perspective on it, because while it's the industry focus is super important and crucial, so is the recipient of these push notifications. But apart from that, please keep me updated with how you go and with your focus group. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your ideas. That sounds very interesting. We will discuss it in our group, and yeah, sure, we will keep you updated.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Welcome. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I've got some links as well with the privacy by design stuff that are coming in the chat. We've had Professor Anne Kavukian hosted in our seminar recently around public interest technology. I think Björn was there for that one actually, but that might give a really good taster around some of those trade-off concepts. So post this, if you can please prompt me if I don't do it by Monday. I'll send a few links that I think your students will find interesting.
Yeah, actually, at the Australia Faculty of Information Sciences, there's one professor who's doing a lot of research on privacy by design. So I just suggested her to our group of students as well. Maybe they can also get in contact with her personally as well.
Yeah,
because,
perfect. And that'd be great. I can just do that.
Exchange. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Birte. Thank you to the LBS couponing group. Then we just quickly move on to the next group, which is Asli. No, Asli is part of this group. No, sorry, I mixed it up. Which is Romy, Pascal, and Tammy. So, who of you is gonna present?
That would be me.
Yeah,
hello.
Perfect.
Hello.
Here you go, Tammy. I hope you already have. Yeah, now you've got the moderator right. So if you could just share your screen. Like it's working.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so a friendly hello from my group as well. My group consists of me, Romy, and Pascal, and we're working on a project with the title Urban Tourism Marketing, a guideline for successful operations with location-based services in local and super-regional areas. So to break it down, it's easily how to use LBS successfully. And our interest in research is success with location-based services in urban tourism marketing. And our idea for the project is creating a guideline for urban tourism companies by generating success factors on the basis of a SWOT, so a strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats analysis, but also of interviews with relevant experts. So our project is following the research question, which communicative actions leads to success with location-based services in urban tourism marketing. Now I'm telling you some things about our theoretical foundations. So we just took a look at location-based services in general, but focused on location-based services in tourism and tourism marketing. So, of course, we did some definition working, and we took a look at possibilities of application and took a look at the current state of research and divided it in national and international research. And yeah. So the method we're using is a method mix. So first of all, like I said, we do a qualitative content analysis according to Myring 2015, but also a SWOT analysis. So our plan is to interview experts who are responsible for communicative actions in companies in the urban tourism market, or rather experts who are responsible for tourism marketing. So we want to ask questions about location-based services, how it's used in those companies, and what are the areas of application, what are the success factors in those areas, and yeah. Then after that, we want to portray the results from the interviews and of the theoretical work and portray it in a SWOT metrics, so that we can, are able afterwards to develop the guideline. Here you can see like our like our plan, our state of progress, and we portrayed it as a checklist. So we already did the first 3 points: getting to know the topic, location-based services, theoretical research, and also the selection of relevant and expedient information. And the green line is what we're currently working on. So we are working on creating the questions for those interviews, and I think we'll be finished by next week. So after that, we plan to search for potential experts and select them, or they select us. I don't know. We will see how it goes. And after that, we want to conduct and evaluate those interviews, of course. And after that, like I said, we'll be presenting those results in a SWOT matrix, and want to create or develop afterwards the guideline. And that was our little presentation about a project. Okay, now I'm cannot talk anymore. Are there any comments, questions? That's great.
So I'm just switching between headphones. My headphones have just...
It's weird. I cannot see you right now, and was like, oh, I love it. I was like, okay, cool.
Unfortunately,
we can't hear you.
We can't hear you anymore.
Can I stop the screen sharing, or do we still need it?
Good question. I don't know. I can't hear Roba anymore. No.
Is there a built-in mic in your headphones, in your earphones? So is there another mic on your computer? You might just
So if you just unplug them, maybe.
No, you just gotta click on this was heißt jetzt Telefonhörer auf Englisch? On
the telephone symbol.
The telephone symbol in the middle between the mic and the camera, and then restart like the audio connection, and then might switch to your inbuilt microphone on your computer, maybe. So like, yeah, now we can hear you again.
Reconnect. They just wouldn't disconnect. They're not working anymore. Sorry, Tammy. It was your presentation was just too good that the mic stopped. Sorry about that. They've been on all day, and I've been, as you can imagine, since about 8 in the morning using stuff. So it hasn't worked. I really loved that presentation. It was so creative the way you presented it. What I found really interesting, Tammy, and also Romy and Pascal, in your project is that your emphasis is on guidelines, and there's been a call in the LBS space for education around the use of technologies and what makes them successful in a range of contexts for many, many years. I know for at least that one of the outcomes from the study that we presented, that I presented to you earlier, was around the need for guidelines and educational campaigns around the use of these technologies. So you're spot on in terms of emphasis, in terms of a need that does not exist in the market. You mentioned your focus is on SWOT and content analysis or content-based based analysis that leads into the interviews. How many interviews are you looking for in terms of the national-international mix?
So the target is around 15. So we need to see, like, maybe it's 13, maybe we get 17. So Yeah.
That's the perfect amount for qualitative, actually. It's usually between even 10 to 15 because you usually find saturation of themes before that. And are you looking at LBS experts, or are you looking at specific categories of a company? What is that? LBS experts, is that correct?
Yes, so we want to try to get people to interview that are working with tourism marketing, but also using location-based services in that context, so they can deliver good answers to those questions like, what are you using it for? How does it work? How it is be accepted, and what is successful? What is not successful? So we get a feeling of what is possible in which kind of companies, but they're all in the tourism market, obviously. And also we got to take a look at Helmstedt, like they said before, that we all kind of have that in mind, that we focus somehow on Helmstedt, but also on other cities, so we get a good feeling of using LBS in the tourism market.
Sure.
Or in tourism marketing.
Sure. And I mean, the regional focus and the focus on one particular area is really good for this because, again, applicability from a pilot study can then be sort of assessed. I'm just interested in knowing whether it would be interesting as part of that 15 sample or 13, 17, whatever the case might be, of those in tourism marketing that are not using and what they would require to allow them to use. I'm wondering whether that's worthwhile as well to have that division, because while it's good to attain best practice in terms of those that have used, it'll be interesting to see what it will take to actually encourage usage with those companies that have not. In terms of guidelines and things like that, I think that's a really good approach as well. This is a project that might warrant you looking into socio-technical theory as well, in addition to the SWOT analysis, maybe as a subset of it, in defining your guidelines. So there might be a good case for that social versus technical divide, because I suspect that not all guidelines will be technology related in this instance. So this is an example that might warrant that kind of consideration as well. Other than that, I love it. It's such a good project.
Thank you.
And your graphics are just excellent. Such an engaging presentation. So well done.
Well, tourism is fun, right?
I'm sold.
It might not be the COVID pandemic, but usually it is.
Yeah. It's
something we're all eagerly waiting for again. And this presentation gets us a glimpse of what will expect us as soon as the pandemic is over. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. And even though it would be really very interesting to keep on talking more about this and the other projects, we just moved to the last project of today. So who of Group 6 is gonna present?
That would be me.
Yeah, Andreas. So here we go. So you may share your screen now.
I will upload the presentation. One moment.
So I guess it's also just 2 or 3 slides, so it's probably not going to take too long. Roba, really sorry for making you not be able to go home at the moment. But
okay. I'm sure the kids would love staying up late. It's a Saturday tomorrow, so that's
yeah. So
for it now, so it's no problem.
We actually talked to your kids before, so they already know that you.
I had a feeling they might be up to something. That's fine. It's all good. These are great projects.
Okay, Andreas, it's your turn.
Feel free to share your camera if you'd like to.
Unfortunately, my camera doesn't work until
no
yet.
Problem.
I'm sorry for that, but we have a slide on our presentation where Dr. Abbas can see our team. So,
okay. Is it just me or is it a blank slide for everyone?
Yes, I see it.
Okay.
Okay. The first slide doesn't work, but it's also not really necessary. Dr. Abbas, here you can see our team members, which includes 4 members, and my pleasure is to introduce you our research topic to you. And our research interest is related to LBS and success factors for successful local new platforms. And mainly we are interested in the following questions. What opportunities do local news portals offer? Which success factors can be named for the development of a local news portal? What future prospects do local news portals have? And what relevance does LBS have for local news portals? As research method, we have chosen a guideline interview, and we wrote to experts from different areas, such as editors, founders, and initiators. And yesterday we finished our questions catalog. And the next step is to conduct the interview. And we will start with interviews at the beginning of December, so next week or the next week. Yeah, yes, it's the next week, yes. And we hope to be finished by Christmas. And then we will evaluate the findings, and as a result and added value of our research, we hope to find key aspects for the development of new and existing local news platforms. On the next 2 slides, you can see our short roadmap. We are actually between point 2 and 3. And yes, that was also a very short presentation. And so I will come to the end, and thanks for your attention. And if there are any questions, I hope I can answer it.
Thank you, Andreas. That was really quite clear. And I really like the synergy there is with your presentation and one of the quantitative, or 2 of the quantitative ones we heard earlier. So I think it's going to be really interesting just from our colleagues' perspective here, but the focus on this area and how all the projects actually nicely fit into each other. You've got the quantitative and now supplementing it with the qualitative aspects. I think this is a really interesting one. This project I find really interesting because it has that input into design and development of existing and future LBS applications. So I find that specific area, the design development aspect, personally very interesting because you really shape the way that these technologies look once they're out in the public. Now, I've got 2 points, Andreas, if I may, and to your team as well. The first one is in relation to the interviews. And again, maybe just widening that stakeholder group if there's potential, if there isn't potential in the context of this project, maybe beyond, because I think as soon as you're providing input into development, it might be helpful to take a user-centered approach. So maybe look at that theory as well and see if that fits into the scope of your project. So user-centered design or human-centered design, given that your value add at the end, as you presented, is informing the development of existing and potential apps. That's the first point. And the second one is more a question to your team, is how will the guidelines for the development of new and existing apps be presented back to industry? So what are your plans around that? What do you envisage that looking like? Is it thematic analysis? Is it design guidelines? Is it a blueprint? Is it a prototype? What will that look like?
That's a really good question. So if anybody out of my team would answer. I see Karen is typing.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I can see that down there. And the reason why I ask is this is where my personal research interests lie, Andreas, and also Karen, is I find it really interesting to take what you get out of an interview process and qualitative data and then convert it into something, a specification. So I can, if your group would like to get in touch, if you get to that point, I can point you in the direction of what I think will be a really good point moving forward. So it's rather than putting you on the spot now. That wasn't the intention. It's more to say that you can go down a technical route of providing specifications, for example. You can go down the design route. You can go down the development route. There's so many different directions, and it's up to your team, I guess, which one you select. So there'll be guidelines for the development of it. I think that's a good idea as well. So instead of design, maybe if you phrase it in addition to guidelines, design criteria, I think would be a really good outcome of this project. I think that would be really attractive to industries or to industry-based partners. Beyond that, I think you might want to think about functional and technical specifications depending on what you get out of the interviews as well. So if you get enough rich detail as part of your interview process, you never know, you might be able to go down the functional technical specifications, perhaps down information architecture route, so in your guidelines providing the different information components that might be used as the basis for these systems. But apart from that, truly an honest statement here is I really look forward to seeing what each of the groups comes up with, because they're so different yet very similar in that field of LBS, that I think it's really going to enrich the research in this domain. So thank you for sharing that, Andreas, and Karen, thank you for your comments as well.
Yeah. May I just add one little thing? I would really like to emphasize on what you said before, Roba, about including the user perspective in this project, especially as you, Karin, Andreas, Tui, and Rebecca told me that it's quite hard actually to find people to talk to you, to find LBS experts in that area who are willing to take part in the interview. So maybe it's a good idea to include some potential users as well, and have like a similar share of interviews with potential users, and try to ask them about how and whether and why they would use LBS local news app like that, and maybe include this in your guidelines for the development of future portals.
Absolutely. I think it's quite necessary as well. And you might even go to local government authorities or tourism boards or whatever you have in Germany, the equivalent in Germany, because I think in this case it's so multifaceted in a similar way to the project that I presented, that it might be not only for the sourcing of interviewees, but just in the interest of the project, if you can triangulate the information between the experts themselves, as you suggested, the users, and then maybe the local tourism authorities. That might be interesting as well, to look at it from that perspective, just to get further information from different perspectives and using a different lens as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Karin is replying in the chat.
No problem.
So we just wait for her final answer. Here we go. Yeah. She said they're also focusing on the added value for the users. So yeah, it would be probably really a good idea to have some potential users as part of your qualitative sample as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you'll find that the users will provide a lot of insight as to not only usability but acceptability in terms of what content they'd like to see. So again, because of the development focus, it's quite necessary that they're included. So what we've been saying, and some of your colleagues have been part of these forums recently in our symposium and so on, we've tried to emphasize that usually these guidelines, these whether it's LBS or other emerging technologies, we take the perspective of designing for people, designing for a particular context. Now we're saying, why don't we turn it on its head a bit and say we're designing with users, with experts for a specific context, which is, I know, just the inclusion of one word, but it has a lot of implications on the success, I believe, of the end system. Thank you so much for sharing that, Andreas.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you. What a great class. You should be very proud. The standard here is outstanding. And that's, I think, a testament to you as instructors and as leaders of this. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. We feel very humbled by your comment.
I love it. I've had so much fun. I can't believe that many hours have gone past. And we were talking on LBS discussions. I hope that was valuable discussion for the students. Again, anytime, feel free to reach out, and it's been a pleasure being here in your class. Thank you for the invitation.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roba. Thank you for joining our class today. It was
our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I really love also to be back at this class by next week, to be available for the students by next week after finishing my master. And I'm quite happy that this session today took place, and I'm really looking forward for the next steps.
I'm looking forward to hearing about the outcomes. Please do keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and hopefully, if things change, we can see you in Germany. Got some scheduled. Great.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you again as well, Roba, for giving such insightful remarks on all the studies, and I'm pretty sure that you will find bits and pieces of what you said today in the end products of all the studies as well. So we'll definitely keep in touch. We'll keep you posted about how the projects go on, and we're looking forward to maybe some future cooperations on this, and maybe really find some way for a joint publication or something like that, depending on the outcomes of all the studies.
Yeah, we will get back to you, and if we can support you in any comparable way, then get back to us anytime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for including me in your class. I feel very humbled by it, and very happy to be here. Everyone have a lovely rest of day there and weekend as well. And I hope the whole situation around the coronavirus eases in Germany and elsewhere as well. Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you all.
And please, sorry to your kids from all of us again for keeping you away from them for so long. So have an enjoyable night with your family. And we're looking forward to seeing you soon in a different context.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.